hours of collecting food from your local grocery store dumpsters, and this is an everyday occurrence in almost every city.
Frank has slept under the same overpass for 20 years, and he has never once ended up in an emergency room with a stomach bug. No parasites, no hepatitis, no dysentery, the thing that actually kills people living outside far more than the cold does. That's not luck. It's a routine he built through trial and error, one bad week of vomiting at a time, until he found the one rule that keeps him healthy when almost nothing else about his life is stable. Everything he drinks gets treated like it's already dirty, even when it looks clean. To understand why that rule matters, you have to understand what's actually in the water so many people living on the street end up drinking.
The option to take a shower is limited. This is a gift.
Public health researchers have tracked outbreaks of hepatitis A tearing through unhoused populations for years, and one of the worst hit San Diego in 2017, when the virus spread through camps without reliable access to bathrooms or clean sources, and reportedly killed around 20 people before the city got it under control. It wasn't the water itself that caused most of it, it was what gets into water when there's nowhere clean to use the bathroom and nowhere to wash your hands afterward. That single detail is the part almost nobody talks about when they picture homelessness. It's not the exposure to cold that gets you first out here. It's what you can't see floating in a puddle you're about to drink from because it's the only puddle around for 6 blocks. Frank learned this the hard way, back when he was newer to the street and still drank straight from a hose bib behind a gas station because it was the closest thing to a tap he could find. Nobody warned him. Nobody hands you a manual when you end up outside. He got sick enough that a stranger called an ambulance for him, and he spent 4 days hooked up to fluids, while a doctor asked him questions about a life he barely remembered, explaining out loud to anyone. He says that week taught him more than any pamphlet ever could. So when he came out, dropped back on the same corner with nowhere else to go, he started paying attention to where water actually came from, not just whether it was flowing. Source mattered more than shape. His first rule is source discipline, and it sounds almost too simple to matter. He rotates between 3 or 4 places every single day instead of relying on one, because a source that's clean on Monday isn't guaranteed to be clean on Friday. A library bathroom tap in the morning before the doors get busy. A church 2 blocks over that leaves an outdoor spigot running during daylight hours. A gas station where the clerk lets him fill a jug if he buys a coffee first. He never assumes a source is safe just because it worked yesterday. No exceptions. Moving water, he says, is water that hasn't had time to grow something in it. Standing water is a gamble, no matter how it looks in the light. His second rule is the one that actually surprised the outreach workers who eventually got to know him over the years. He filters everything twice, even water that already came straight out of a tap. He carries a cloth bandana folded into quarters and a small container of activated charcoal he refills whenever he passes a hardware store that sells it loose by the bin. He runs every jug through both before he drinks a single drop, treating a public tap exactly the same way he'd treat a puddle sitting in a ditch. A lot of people would call that overkill for something that already came out of a faucet. Frank calls it the reason he hasn't been sick in 2 decades. The habit was never really about the charcoal itself. It's about never trusting a source enough to skip the step. Because the one time you skip it is the one time it costs you a hospital stay you can't afford and a body that's already run down from sleeping outside. His third rule is boiling. And this is the part that takes the most effort, and the part he almost never lets himself skip, even on nights when he's exhausted and the fire feels like one more fight he doesn't have the energy for. He built a small setup out of a coffee can and scrap metal he scavenged from a construction dumpster years ago. And when he can get a fire going somewhere safe, away from anything that would draw attention or get him moved along by the police, he boils every container he's not fully sure about for a full rolling minute. Not a simmer, a real boil. A full minute. He learned that exact distinction from a nurse at a free clinic downtown, who told him a lukewarm pot does nothing against the parasites that actually put people in intensive care. Giardia doesn't care how clean the water looks going in. It cares whether it got hot enough for long enough to actually die. There's a fourth habit too, one he almost never mentions unless you ask directly, and it has nothing to do with filters or fire. He tests water with his own senses before he trusts any device or any bandana to save him from it. Cloudy water gets dumped immediately, no matter how thirsty he is. Water with any smell at all, even something faint he can't quite name, gets dumped too. He learned to trust that instinct after watching a man 2 camps over drink from a runoff ditch during a heat wave because he was too dehydrated to wait for a real source. And the man ended up seizing in an ambulance less than 6 hours later. Frank tells that story to anyone new who lands nearby. Not to scare them, he says, but because nobody told him either, and a story sticks longer than a rule does. Winter changes the whole routine, and this is where most of the newer people around him get caught off guard. Rain and snow look like free, clean water falling straight out of the sky, and it mostly is, right up until it hits a roof, a gutter, or the ground it lands on. Frank collects rainwater in a repurposed jug, only when it's coming straight down in open air, never runoff, and he still boils it before he drinks it, the same as everything else. He's seen people assume snow is automatically safe because it's white and cold and looks untouched, and he's watched those same people get sick from meltwater that ran across a parking lot first, picking up whatever oil and grime the asphalt was holding onto. The sky doesn't clean water, only the last surface does. None of this would matter much if he didn't also treat his own hands like part of the water system, because that's usually where the real contamination starts, long before the water does. He carries a small bottle of hand sanitizer he gets refilled at a shelter's supply closet twice a month, and he uses it before he eats, before he drinks, and after he touches anything anywhere near a public bathroom. He watched too many people around him over the years get sick from perfectly clean water poured straight into dirty hands. A nurse who eventually interviewed him for a local public health survey said his instincts, self-taught over 20 years with no formal training at all, matched almost exactly what a sanitation engineer would have recommended if you'd handed them the same set of problems. She said most of the people she treats for waterborne illness on her rounds weren't actually drinking bad water. They were drinking perfectly fine water, poured into dirty hands, eaten with dirty fingers. What actually keeps Frank alive isn't a secret ingredient buried in some forgotten trick, and it isn't luck either. It's that he refuses to relax the routine, even on the days it would be so much easier not to bother, even when the water pouring out of the tap looks completely clean to the naked eye. That discipline is the whole story. Everyone around him who got seriously sick over the years, he says, got sick on the one day they decided this particular time didn't need the extra step. The stomach bug that put 3 people in his old camp in the hospital last winter started, he's convinced, with a single skipped boil on a night that was too cold and too late to bother with a fire. These days, Frank isn't the only one running the routine. A handful of people who've stuck around his stretch of the city long enough have picked up pieces of it from watching him, the same way he picked up pieces from that free clinic nurse and from watching other people get sick. He'll point a newcomer toward the church spigot without being asked, or hand over a spare scrap of cloth if someone's filtering with nothing at all. An outreach worker who runs a weekly supply drop nearby said Frank's Corner has one of the lowest rates of reported stomach illness she's tracked across any of the sites she visits, and she credits it less to any program the city runs and more to one man who decided 2 decades ago that he was done getting sick and never let the standard slip after that. He's watched people cycle through his corner of the city for 2 decades now, some staying for a season, some for years, some gone within a month of arriving. Some get housed eventually, through a program or a shelter bed that finally opens up. Some don't make it through a hard winter at all, but the ones who last the longest out here he'll tell you without much hesitation, aren't the toughest or the luckiest of the bunch. They're the ones who found one non-negotiable habit early on and never let themselves skip it, no matter how tired, how cold, or how much easier it would have been in the moment to just drink from whatever hose happened to be closest. So was it worth it? 20 years of boiling water in a battered coffee can, filtering it through cloth and charcoal from a hardware store bin, rotating between 4 different taps across the neighborhood, just to dodge one bad week that could have ended everything much sooner than it should have. Frank would tell you the routine cost him nothing he wasn't already willing to spend, and it bought him 2 decades that a lot of people in his exact position never got the chance to see.